So I got to thinking, and I probably said it before, but I'm a bit of a person that likes to have control over situations. I don't label myself as a control freak per se, because I don't feel that I'm controlling, but I like to feel like things are going to work out the way I would like them to. And this became evidently clear one time. My wife and I, we were in the car with some friends, and we were at a wedding that was up in northern Ohio, and the wedding had just concluded, and we were about to head to the wedding reception afterward. And so we were leaving the church parking lot, and we had to turn left out, and it automatically went from parking lot onto like a main highway, 4 lanes, 2 going this way, 2 going that way, an intersection, higher speed limit. And I was pulling out, and I got, out into the middle of the road, and my car just started, the lights started to flicker, and it stalled. And there were cars coming from my left, right toward us. And it was in this moment that inside, I felt panicked. But I knew that that wasn't going to help the situation. So I just calmly turned the key over, let it sit for 2 seconds, as if I had 2 seconds. I had 4 people, including myself, in the car, and I just calmly turned the key back over, and the car started, and I finished my left turn with all of us not getting hit. T-boned by high speed. Would have been a bit of a rough situation. And I remember the feeling after the fact of just like somehow I managed to stay calm long enough to get the car going, but then it took me at least a mile or 2 down the road to calm down. And not outwardly panic, but I could feel all the tenseness in my body just trying to subside and get my head back into conversing with our friends in the car and getting to the wedding reception and all that different stuff. I don't know if you all have ever had situations like that before. Anybody been in a seemingly dire situation, feeling like you're not in control and you'd like to be in control, feeling like you don't know how things will work out, but something needs to give, and hopefully it gives in your direction? I think probably all of us have experienced that before. And some of us might feel like we go through that in seasons. And in reality, while I've had my moments like that where I was able to keep cool in the moment and get us into safety, I haven't always felt like that in my life. And it's an intriguing thing because that sense of control can have a good place if you care about yourself and your loved ones and wanting to make sure that things in life go okay and that the people that you love are taken care of. But that sense of control can go wayward too. You can end up making self-benefiting decisions in ways that end up disparaging or harming other people, or you can just get things totally wrong. Unfortunately, that's the world that we live in, because that level of control can be exerted into power and into authority, and it can lead all of us on the wrong path if we don't keep ourselves in check. We're in this series called The Final Words, and we're leading up to Resurrection Sunday, where we get to celebrate that Jesus, though he was crucified, would be risen on the 3rd day and then ascend to the Father at the right hand. He is Lord and Savior. He is Messiah. He is King. He is the ultimate in power and authority. And yet his exercise of that power and authority, that level of control over the situation, is not the way that we might come to expect it. In fact, he exercises that power and authority in ways that run contrary to the way we would probably run power and authority if we had it. which is the real kicker when it comes to control, isn't it? We think we might have power and authority over situations and circumstances, but in fact, we are powerless. But we're really good at fooling ourselves into believing otherwise. And in the story that we're going to look at today, actually stories, because we're going to look at John chapter 18, 2 sections. We're going to look at the moment that Jesus is not only arrested, but we're also going to look at the moment that Jesus comes face to face with the Roman governor of Judea named Pontius Pilate, the prefect. And we're going to see that there are people around Jesus that try to grasp for control. And we're going to see Jesus exercise his power and authority in a way that doesn't look very controlling at all. In fact, it might appear that he's got no power and authority whatsoever. But as John, the evangelist who wrote the Gospel of John, often shows, the way things appear on the surface with Jesus is often upside down in ways that exalt him. And that's key, that idea of him being exalted. And so I want us to look at these 2 stories this morning and reconsider them. You know, a lot of these stories that deal with Jesus' arrest, his trial, his crucifixion, his resurrection. Maybe if you've been in church for a long time, you've grown up hearing these stories. If you haven't been in church for a long time, but you've even become at all vaguely familiar with the celebration of Easter, you might have heard these stories before, and we come to assume things about them, and we maybe miss the details that elevate exactly what's going on and tells us who Jesus is and what he is really all about. And so the first story we're going to start with is in John chapter 18. It's verses 1 through 11. And it's the moment that Jesus is arrested. And I want you to follow along with me on the screen here as we look at John 18, starting at chapter 1. It says, after Jesus had spoken these words, I'm going to stop right here. Sorry, I like doing this. Last week we looked at the prayer of Jesus in John 17. And I mentioned that prayer comes in the middle of Jesus' farewell speech to his disciples. He's had this intimate moment where he's not only shared with them the way to remain rooted, but he prays not only that God's work will be complete in him, that his disciples will stay rooted. But if you remember last week, Jesus also prayed for you and I, those of us that are following Jesus to this day. And so after this moment of both intimacy and yet encouragement and hope that not only was for Jesus' closest followers, earliest followers, but also for us, it says, after Jesus had spoken these words, that prayer, the moment that amen happened, it says he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these people go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken, "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath." am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given to me?" Now, this story is wild on so many different levels. First of all, Jesus has shared these moments. He's told his disciples along the way in the Gospel of John how to be obedient to Jesus, how to keep faith, how to remain connected to the vine. He's taught them the ways of the kingdom. They have heard him. They have asked their questions. They've asked for their assurance that he is who he says he is, and that their lot in relation to him will be as he says that it will be. And he gives them that hope, that assurance, that clarity, and he prays with them, and he prays for them. And they go to this place, the Garden of Gethsemane, that was a common place for Jesus to take his disciples. It's easy to read this story and think that he just went to this place this one time and it was an obscure kind of place, but we know in the Gospels that we're always told at this moment that this is a familiar place for Jesus to go with his disciples. That's why Judas knew that he would be there. And so Jesus goes here with his disciples. And it says that Judas, who betrayed him, anticipating the betrayal that is actually taking place here at this hour, says that he knew the place and he took a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They came with lanterns and torches and weapons. Now, the word here in the Greek for detachment actually typically signifies a large cohort of Roman soldiers. In fact, it's something to the tune of 600. The best way to describe this would be that if there was a fire somewhere and the fire department needed to come put the fire out, someone would call and they'd report the fire, and a fire truck would come, and the firefighters that were on that truck would get out and they would do what they needed to do to put the fire out and to save lives. And someone after the fact would say, the fire department came and saved the day. They put the fire out. But obviously, the entire fire department didn't show up. But representatives of firefighters that were on that truck showed up. And that's what's being described here, of course, in a more negative setting, with the soldiers. The entire cohort of 600 Roman soldiers did not show up with clubs and lanterns and torches and weapons to arrest Jesus. But a group from that cohort of 600 came. And it's important that we understand that, because that means that the authorization to send people to arrest Jesus wasn't granted by the Jewish religious leaders, but by Pontius Pilate, the governor, the prefect of Judea. And Jesus will eventually, as we're going to get to in a moment, come face to face with him. But not only did the Roman soldiers come, but it says that the police, the security, the people that were in power from the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, they also came along with the Romans. And this is really important, because this is a group of people in power and authority that are constantly vying for power with one another. See, the Romans occupied Judea, but they allowed the religious leaders and their political authorities that were part of this religious leadership to run the show. And I put that in air quotes because they weren't really running the show. They just got to believe that they were. And yet they were constantly jockeying for power. And yet they're coming together to arrest Jesus. They are the powers that be, or so they think. And yet right off the bat, when they show up, Jesus, he's the one that speaks first. And he asks them a simple question, which, by the way, I don't know how calm you can be when you see these groups of power and authority with their weapons and their torches. And you just simply say, "What are you looking for?" By the way, when you know they're looking for you. So he asks, and they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he says, "I am he." And it says that Judas, by the way, is standing with them. And it's important because at one point Judas was standing with Jesus. He was one of the 12, one of the disciples. He has switched sides. He has gone from the side of the Messiah to the side of those in power, or so he thinks. And he's agreed to betray Jesus. So now he is standing with them. And that group of people that includes Roman soldiers, the police that belong to the religious leaders, and the turncoat Judas are standing together. And when Jesus says, "I am he," it says they step back and they fall to the ground. His words knock them on their backsides. He doesn't get into fisticuffs. He doesn't tell his disciples to fight. He simply speaks, "I am he," and his power is displayed by those who are in power falling to the ground. He lets them get up, dust themselves off a little bit, and as if to show he has not lost command, says he asks them again, "All right, want to try again? Who are you looking for?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus says, "Well, I told you that I'm he. We're here. What do you want to do?" And then he says, "So if you're looking for me, let these people go." And these people would be his disciples that have come to the garden with him at this hour. After they've been rest assured, after they've been shown the way, after they've been taught and they've seen the way that Jesus is and the way that they ought to be. Remember, before Jesus started telling the disciples all that they need to remain connected to, there was an episode in chapter 13 where Jesus decided to put himself into the position of a lowly slave and wash the feet of his disciples. And I know despite a multi-billion-dollar campaign that's on TV right now that shows foot washing, there's more to the story than just a TV commercial. Because Jesus is constantly exercising his authority by lowering himself to the position of a slave. He teaches his disciples that if they want to emulate him, they have to put themselves in the same position. And so, the person that is the Messiah, high up the chain, lowers himself and washes his disciples' feet. And it's Simon Peter in this moment that has a problem with his master lowering himself to this level. He actually says, "You're not going to wash my feet. I can't accept this from you. Because I know that in the pecking order, I'm lower than you are, and this doesn't sit right with me." And yet Jesus says, effectively, you must accept this act of service that I'm doing. Because this act of service foreshadows the act of service that I'm about to give and the brutality that I'm about to take on for you. Now, I hone in on Peter in this moment for a reason. Because after Jesus asks the authorities that are there to arrest him to let his followers go peacefully, Simon Peter, who has learned, I should say he's heard, I'm not sure he's learned, the lesson from Jesus, draws out his sword. And this is the only gospel that gives us this much detail. The other gospels that talk about this incident don't name Peter, and they also don't name the slave of the high priest. But here John gives us detail. It's Peter that draws the sword, and it's the high priest slave Malchus that takes the other end of the sword to the ear. Now, in the original language, the implication here isn't that his entire ear got lopped off. It's maybe the earlobe, the corner. And there's a very important reason that that is described in this way. Imagine that you're Peter, and you think you found the Messiah, and he's just assured you and the rest of the disciples that everything's going to be all right as long as you remain connected to him. And you go to a place that you're used to going with Jesus. And it's a place that you've probably grown to love being at because you're with your master and things are going to be okay. And you're learning from him and you're praying with him and you're witnessing these wonderful things. And this is, well, it's kind of your happy place. And your happy place is about to be turned upside down because it's dark. Remember, they've come with torches for a reason. They need to be able to see. Peter can't see what he's doing, but he does see what's going on here. And he begins to get frantic and frightened. And in that moment of frantic and frightened, he loses all concept for everything that he's learned from Jesus. In fact, he's lost the plot of the moment because Jesus isn't drawing a sword and cutting off anybody's ear, but Peter draws a sword. And by the way, the cutting off of the ear, the reason that it's like just a part of the ear is important is because Peter probably wasn't aiming for the ear. He's in the dark, he's scared, and he's going on a reaction, and he's probably just trying to get whatever he can and probably kill Malchus. You know, that sort of thing. But the sword doesn't quite land where he wants, so it gets, actually, it's the right ear, sorry. I did my left. Let's get specific here. Nevertheless, Peter not only misses the mark with his sword, he misses the mark in what Jesus is all about. So Jesus says to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Jesus is very much in control in this situation. And in his exercise of control, of power, of authority, he gives himself up. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't lose his composure. His very words have the power to knock the entire cohort on the ground, and yet he simply speaks. He puts his disciple in his place, and he gives himself up. Now we know in other gospel stories that Jesus actually heals Malchus's ear in that moment. But that's not the emphasis that John wants to give us. Instead, he's wanting to show the authority and power of Jesus and the way that Jesus wields it. It's different from the worldly powers and principalities. And that comes clear into focus when we get to the last part of chapter 18. So we already know that the Roman soldiers have been sent by Pontius Pilate. He's the one orchestrating all of this. And the fact that I just told you he's the one orchestrating all of this is part of the misreading that we've had of this entire story for centuries. We kind of look at Pontius Pilate as this weak individual that cowers to the Jewish leaders. But Pontius Pilate's playing a game, so he thinks. And that game becomes evident when Jesus, after going from arrest to being questioned by the high priest, after the moment where Peter denies knowing Jesus 3 times, Jesus ends up before Pilate. And this is what happens when he's with Pilate. It says, "Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, 'What accusation do you bring against this man?' They answered, 'If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you.' Pilate said to them, 'Take him yourselves and judge him according to your own law.' The Jews replied, 'We are not permitted to put anyone to death.' This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into this world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a rebel. Now as the story unfolds, and when we get to Good Friday, we'll look at how the story unfolds. Spoiler alert, it ends up with Jesus on the cross and then raising on the third day. I just can't help myself but get to the end because it's so exciting. But here in this moment, Jesus comes face to face with the power over the people. The procurator himself, Pontius Pilate. We mainly only know about Pontius Pilate in the New Testament, but there are a couple of extra sources outside of the Bible that also fill in some details about Pontius Pilate. And one of the pieces of information that we gather is that he was a cruel governor. He loved to keep the people in their place by the most vicious means necessary. And so, knowing that about Pontius Pilate, it can be perplexing to read this story in the way that we're used to reading it. Because oftentimes we look at the back and forth between Pilate and Jesus, and we look at the back and forth between Pilate and the religious leaders, and we think, this doesn't sound like a guy that's in charge. This sounds like a guy that's giving in. But that's actually not what's happening here. See, Pilate's main job is to keep the peace on Rome's terms. And that's very important to understand. Keeping the peace on Rome's terms means that Rome stays in power wherever they have wielded their power, including in Judea. And that also means by any means necessary. And that also means keeping things at bay, keeping uprisings snuffed out. And so Pilate decides that he's going to play a game here. Because the religious leaders, even though they know that they have to also keep the peace so that they don't get their heads lopped off, they vehemently oppose Jesus. They want him out. They want him gone. But they can't do it. Nothing Jesus has said or done has given them permission, according to their law, to put Jesus to death. Especially not in the manner of crucifixion. Something only the Romans could do, something only they were good at doing. And so they go to the head to try to get what they want. And Pilate recognizes this. So do you know what he decides to do? He decides to make them beg. Everything Pilate says that sounds like he's defending Jesus is not to defend Jesus at all. He could care less about Jesus. And if you don't believe that, just look at how dismissive he is to what Jesus says. First, he questions, "Are you the king of the Jews?" By the way, that's not a question that you want to answer yes to. Because if you are a would-be king, well, in Rome, there's only one king, and it's the emperor. And Pilate only has his position because the emperor gave it to him. So he's going to keep the chain of command going, and there won't be a king from Judea in his mind. So he questions Jesus. And Jesus, in an enigmatic sort of way, responds first to Pilate with a question. He says, "How are you coming to this question in the first place? Has someone told you about me? Or are you coming to this in some other manner?" And Pilate again dismisses Jesus. He says, "Do I look like one of you? You think I care?" And so he asks him again. And Jesus then eventually tells him, not only do you say that I am, which is turning the question on Pilate, but he also tells him, I'm not a king of this world. Which in one hand sounds like it should let Jesus off the hook, but it actually doesn't. Because Jesus is in effect saying, whatever kings, whatever rulers you think there are in this world, in whatever location you think they exist, I am above all of it. And not only that, Jesus then starts telling him that his followers, were he a worldly king, would have been taking up arms to fight, which is kind of ironic because that's what Peter tried to do, even though he shouldn't have. And he reminds him, but I'm not a king of this world. I don't have to exert my power the way you do, Pilate. He says that his followers belong to the truth because he testifies to the truth. Earlier, when he asks his disciples when his disciples ask him to show him the way, Jesus in chapter 14 verse 6 says, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except by me. Which, by the way, I just want you to catch something. Jesus is the Son who's being obedient to the Father. Pilate is the governor being obedient to the emperor. Who do you think actually has the higher authority in this situation? It's Jesus. But in Pilate's mind, he's got all the power. He's going to put this would-be king in his place, and he's going to make the religious leaders that want Jesus snuffed out beg for him to do it. So he goes back to the people and he says, I've found nothing to charge this person for, even though he already has because Jesus admitted to being a king. He has found grounds to crucify him. He would crucify anyone for that charge, but he's not going to because he wants the religious leaders to beg for it. So he plays this game. And then he says, you know what, I've got a custom. By the way, here's a fun fact. There is no custom. He's making it up as it goes. I've got a custom. At this time of year, I'll release someone. So do you want me to release the king of the Jews, which, by the way, would have offended the Jewish leaders because they don't view Jesus as the Messiah. So he's going to insult them and also make them beg for what they want. And what do? Well, the religious leaders, they clamor for Barabbas. It says here that Barabbas was a rebel, and that is putting it lightly. He's not got a leather jacket and a motorcycle. He was a rebellious individual that probably was killing Romans in order to reestablish his own people's power. He was an insurrectionist. He is in prison for insurrection against Rome. And the religious leaders would rather have him than Jesus. Now, as the story continues to go on, Pilate continues to make them beg. And eventually they start to plea. Imagine them on their hands and knees and the people joining. Please crucify him. Now here's the kicker. Pilate wants to crucify him. But now he's got the religious leaders to beg for it. He gets what he wants. They get what they want. the would-be king is dead, and the peace is kept. He's brutal. Why? Because Jesus has done nothing to deserve crucifixion. And yet he's going to make sure that his power remains. There's only one problem for Pilate. Who's really in control of this situation? Is it Pilate? Is it the religious leaders? Is it Peter? The answer is all no. The one in power is Jesus. Elsewhere in the Gospel of John, Jesus at one point says that he will be lifted up, elevated, exalted, in the same way that Moses once lifted up the staff. He would be exalted. Kings are exalted. Pilate has just decided to force the religious leaders to beg to get what they want, which is to crucify Jesus. And when Jesus is nailed to the cross and exalted, do you know what Pilate has just done because Jesus is actually in control? He has just proven that Jesus is king by exalting him. That's the kind of control that Jesus has. Put another way, Jesus showed unmatched love and power through his ultimate sacrifice. Jesus showed unmatched love and power through his ultimate sacrifice. When we want to be in control, we try to take the bull by its horns. We try to manipulate the situation. We try to throw up our fists. We try to use our ingenuity, our smarts, our strength to figure out the problem. We're always fighting for control. And sometimes people in power seats, they never lose that desire to remain in control. In fact, the more power they get, the more control they want to keep. The problem is that we're all powerless. The only one who isn't showed unmatched love and his power through his ultimate sacrifice. That's why we celebrate at Easter. Because we don't just show and talk about and celebrate the love of God through his one and only Son, Jesus, but we show his might, not in his ability to rain down fire and to smite his enemies, but he shows his power and restraint, his ability to use mere words, and his willingness to lay down his life for us. And the beautiful thing about Jesus showing such love and power is not only is he our Savior because of it, but he is our Lord, which means his way is our way, or at least it should be. Jesus isn't just our Redeemer, he's our exemplar. Which means that those of us that want to exercise our control and power in life need to take a step back and recognize who's in charge and do as he would do and speak as he would speak, even if it fights against every fiber of our being. It's nice to tell a story like I did at the beginning when your ability to take control and be calm and collected gets you out of a bad situation. It's bad, though, when our control takes us the other direction. I have learned more and more in my own life that I can count probably on one hand the amount of times my control bails me out, and all the other times my jockeying for control creates more problems and more headaches, not only for myself, but the people around me. I have learned how much I don't have any control or power at all. Trust me, I am a husband, I am a parent, and I'm a minister. If there was ever a person that should ever laugh at themselves in the mirror for thinking they have any control at all, I've got the trifecta. And trust me, you can relate. We all know it. And here's the beauty of this season. It's not only an opportunity to thank God for His grace, but it's an opportunity to let go. To let go of the need for power, authority, control in every facet of our lives, and give it over to the one who is in control, who does have power, and who will exercise those in not only authority, but in love. And then when we let that go, and we let the Spirit guide us, we can emulate His way by showing love. And that's what Jesus does in this moment. When everyone else around Him gets it wrong, when everyone else around Him loses their cool, when everyone else around Him wants to solve things on their own, even if it means crucifying an innocent, they do it. But Jesus lays down His life. And while the result is brutal, the result exalts Him as King, as Lord over all. Hopefully when you came in, you grabbed communion on your way in. We take communion every week because we recognize that Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that He is our Savior and that He is our example, that He is the way and the truth and the life. And when we take communion, we remember that He gave of His body and that His blood was spilled on our account, and that He showed us the way to lay down His life for others, and calls us not only to embrace Him as our Savior, but to be obedient and do the same as Lord. And so I'm going to give us a moment to ponder that, and after we take a moment of reflection, we will take communion together as one church family. Take and drink from this cup. This is His blood, which is poured out for us. Please join me in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank You for the story of Your Son, Jesus, for the reality of the life He lived, the life He laid down, and the life He gives us. Thank You that though He is ruler of all, that He exercises His power in love and in grace, that He made a way to You by laying down His life, and that we are called to embody His love in word and deed in all that we say and do to each and every person we come in contact with, so that they may know You, that they may know the good news, that they may come to faith, and they may live out their faith each and every day. And so God, I pray that as we reflect on the resurrection story in this season and the events that lead up and the words that Jesus speaks, those powerful words, I pray, God, that we will not only ponder Your grace, but ponder the way that You call us to live and that by the power of your Spirit, we will be emboldened to do it. And we pray these things in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.